Back? Okay, so we're going to pick it up there. Sorry for that little interruption. God sounds the trumpets to wake up humanity just prior to the close of human probation. And I feel certain that there'll be obviously people that will respond in the affirmative and will be a part of God's kingdom as a result of that. Or else God wouldn't waste the time.
Yeah, I feel like trumpets are just the thing that really just reassures that he exists and is there for everybody, so they can't deny it anymore.
But like we looked at a few weeks back, the trumpets, or the sounding of the trumpets, are a small consideration of what the plagues will be.
Susan said trumpets sound at the entrance of royalty. And since the King of Kings is about to make his entry, people need to be in place and ready for that arrival.
Sure. So, yeah, a lot of these things, of course, have dual purposes, and that's just what you would expect from a God who is a sovereign creator. All right. Once probationary time closes, then mercy ceases to plead, and then the Bible says basically that God's wrath is poured out in these plagues. And that's really what we're looking at when we get to chapter 17. The seventh bowl, or the seventh plague. We talked about this last week. It's basically a pronouncement that comes out of the temple. It is done, it says in verse 17 there. And there were noises and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, etc. In other words, it's almost like nature itself has been subdued by the hand of God, by the Spirit of God, and all of a sudden when that is released, when that hand is lifted, nature itself rebels or is convulsing and at the absence of the Spirit of God. And you have this great earthquake. And it talks about the great city was divided into three parts.
Okay, they said it's better.
Now, it doesn't really identify what city that is. Right? It could be Jerusalem. It could be another city, but it talks about the great city. But I want you to notice where the focus goes in verse 19 there. It says, "And great Babylon was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath." In other words, that's only been partially revealed, of course, through the trumpets, and now it is fully revealed, God's displeasure with the great Babylon, it says here. Right? So who is great Babylon? Because the next two chapters really deal with this great Babylon, right? When you go into chapter 18 even. It's talking about verse 4. I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, lest ye share in her sins, lest ye receive of her plagues." So it's almost as if in chapter 18 you kind of step back before probationary time closes, before the plagues are actually poured out. And God is saying there will be a call out of Babylon, out of great Babylon. So what is great Babylon? What are we talking about there?
False worship?
Okay. False worship. Is it more than false worship?
It's a whole encompassing system, because Babylon was a counterfeit. You know, the original Babylon, the Tower of Babel, was set up in an effort to shake their fist at God and say, "We'll do it our way."
Right. Well, it's of course, we don't have hardly any of the detail of how that developed, but we know that Nimrod was involved with that. Now, who was Nimrod? We're talking about the literal Babylon, the original Babylon.
He was a grandson of Noah, but I don't remember how many generations down.
He was a great-grandson. Okay, he was Noah's great-grandson. Okay, so you had Noah, then you had Ham, you had Ham, then you had Cush, and then you had Nimrod. Okay, so
Susan says both the city and the system.
Yeah.
But Nimrod was the founder of a mystery religion that continues to be used around the world to this day.
Okay. obviously, I don't know if Nimrod was the originator. I think it goes all the way back even to the roots of idolatry and false worship. I believe go all the way back to the garden when Eve was deceived in the Garden of Eden. And I think over time, these little threads and ideas came along. Certainly they were escalated after the flood, because after the flood, what does the Bible call Nimrod? If you go to chapter 10, Genesis, how is he identified there?
Mighty hunter.
He's the mighty hunter. One of the problems that they had after the flood was that obviously you're starting over with just 8 people, but you have the proliferation of lots of animals. Okay. Now remember, there was actually a concern that Noah had about the animals. And what did God say to him about the animals? Because remember, his concern was there's only 8 of us. These animals are going to multiply quickly, and they're going to basically take over the planet, and we're going to be prey. Right? We're going to be on the meal ticket. And so what did God do?
Put the fear of man and animals.
Put the fear of man and animals. But one of the commentaries that I read says that the reason why Nimrod was called a mighty hunter is because they were having a problem with wild beasts at that time. And there was a lot of, just like today, if you're living out in secluded areas where there are wild beasts, you're somewhat vulnerable of being attacked. Not necessarily
bears, mountain lions.
Yeah, bears, mountain lions, things like not that they would go necessarily looking for you, but if you happen to stumble upon some bear cubs, well, Katie barred the door. Look out! You better start running because Mama's not far behind, right? And animals can be kind of relentless in that regard, and can obviously we hear occasionally. We occasionally hear shark attacks, bear attacks, lion attacks, cougars, mountain lions, whatever.
It usually happens when a person is somewhere they're not supposed to be.
Right, and of course on the planet, you had, at this time in history, you have people kind of scattered around a little bit, but more or less in one central location. Well, I think Nimrod became successful, from what the commentary that I read, became successful in keeping the animals kind of at bay. That's why he was called a mighty hunter. And he developed a reputation and, of course, a lot of respect for protecting the people. And so what he ended up doing was he ended up saying, hey, I got an idea. Let's everybody get in one place and we'll build some big walls to keep the animals out, and we'll have safety and security. Right? So you can just follow the thinking and the logic of how this would have been something that people would have said, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. Let's follow this guy. He's got some good ideas, and he seems like he can protect us.
Well, there's always somebody who's charismatic and effective at doing what they
Right,
do.
exactly.
Doesn't mean that they're righteous, that just means that they are effective at getting a following.
Sure, okay. But when you read some of the commentary from Edersheim and some of the people that write some of the Herodias and whatnot, you find out that just like in human nature, when people start following you and putting you on a pedestal, what typically happens?
You get an
Little
ego.
bit of pride.
The tendency is for you to become somewhat full of yourself
Puffed up.
and puffed up, and you can become corrupted pretty easily.
Susan
Well-
says, according to some Hebraic accounts, Nimrod's very name means rebel.
Rebel, exactly. Yeah, thank you. I was going to bring that out. Exactly. So she's right in line with that.
She's been studying.
She'd been studying. Okay. Now, who was Nimrod's wife?
Semiramis.
Semiramis. And who was their supposed child?
Tammuz.
Tammuz. Okay. So when you
Except
start
except that she conceived Tammuz after
After-
Nimrod died.
after Nimrod, right? So what we're talking about now, what's being presented, and you got to remember, when you're put on this pedestal and everybody's following you, you come up with all these maybe crazy ideas about things. And if he had been privy
Even if he was
to,
the king, more or less, and he died.
he was a king priest. He was a king and a priest. Nimrod was. So here you have somebody that's really a secular leader, but also a religious leader.
How could he have been a religious leader? They didn't have any religion, did they?
Well,
He was the religion.
Baal worship. When you think of him as being Baal worship or Babylon worship, he's credited with kind of getting that, jump-starting that. I think all these principles were already there. And he just had this crowd of people and said, let's take them in this direction.
Let's build this big tower.
And then after he's gone, the family is going to want to stay in control, want to stay in power. I mean, just look at today. The same stupid thing happens today about family, trying to stay in control, stay in power, monarchy, and royalty and whatnot. And so they come up with these crazy stories of how, Nimrod was supposedly cut in pieces and spread all around. And then Semiramis comes up with this idea that
he became the sun god.
He became the sun god, and Tammuz was the son of the sun god, and so forth. And so you get this whole.
It's also like a false parallel to kind of a virgin birth.
And that has played out numerous times. If you go back and do the research, I read in the book Babylon Mystery Religion last night. He cited a dozen examples of
religious systems that have mysterious birth and supernatural birth.
Supernatural kind of birth, etc. And what it really evolves into is mother-son worship. Okay?
Which you see in the Virgin and the baby.
Which you see in the Virgin, and of course in the Catholic system, for example, you have Virgin Mary, and of course you have Jesus, the Son of God. So the whole thing plays out, but it's played out numerous times in various organizations over the years. Right. So here you have and again, I think this is a jump starting. This is a giant step forward for Baal worship and whatnot. Much of the Babylonian worship was carried on through mysterious symbols, and that's why it was called a mysterious or mystery religion, etc. The golden calf at Mount Sinai, that was a symbol of Tammuz, right? And that's why 3,000 people were killed there at Mount Sinai for worshiping.
And one of the symbols of Tammuz was a T, which we now call a cross.
Exactly. So you have sun god or Baal worship, and fire considered his earthly representation, plus lightning, fire. You got the sun, images, fish, trees, pillars, animals.
Baal was also the god of the storm.
As different people came along and started to spread out, particularly after the Tower of Babel, you had the same principles called different things by different groups of people, all dealing with the same basic principles of false.
This is interesting. Susan
false
said
worship.
They want nothing to do with God, but they mimic him at every turn.
Yes, exactly. Now, Paul, of course, was dealing
That's
with
because
this.
Satan wants to be God, and he's behind the whole system.
He's behind the whole thing.
He's wanted to be worshipped from the beginning of the rebellion.
Paul kind of touched on this a little bit in Romans chapter 1. I'll go ahead and read these couple verses here. 21 to 26. Romans chapter 1. It says, because although they knew God, right, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds, and four-footed animals, and creeping things. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever.
That's also a very interesting statement too, just thinking of the popular theory of evolution, talking about changing the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image of corruptible things.
Right.
Basically worshipping nature over
the
designer.
Calling light darkness and darkness light.
But just seeing as well the path that follows now, the issues that he's talking about here are some of the same issues that are repeating themselves in today's time when people are getting to a place where we're worshiping animals again.
And you can see how this is, hugging trees and worshiping animals. Now it's putting that life.
And the Christian church has gone along with having their blessing of the animal services and taking out objectionable phrases
I mean,
from the
the very
hymns.
day that they worship is Sunday.
And of course, it takes you down a path. This is for this reason God gave them up to vile passions. And even their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature, etc. So it takes you down a path that's unnatural, that's corrupt. And this is why God has to put it in check. And really, the plagues at the end, after probation closes, is God putting the whole system that it's had free reign for at least 4,400 years. He's putting it in check, total check. Okay? Now, when you go back to the Garden of Eden, what did Satan tell Eve? Do what you want, think what you want, live the way you want, right? You will never die. Okay? Thou shalt not die. But God, of course, said, if you obey and live, disobey and die. And of course, this is exactly what's playing out at the end. Their disobedience and their vileness and their unnatural affection toward things rather than the Creator has left them vulnerable, and they're going to experience exactly what God said from the very start. Disobey and you die. Right? Herodias said that Babylon was the primal source from which all systems of idolatry flowed.
It makes sense, because
yeah.
that's where the languages were confounded. So when their languages were separated so that they could only stay with their own family group, they naturally, over the years, begin to move away from each other since they didn't speak the same language. They would move in further out from the center.
Exactly.
And so as they developed that, they would take whatever pieces of the religious practices they had learned and had been passed down to them,
Right.
and develop their own system over time.
Yeah. So basically, when we read here in chapter 16, and Great Babylon was remembered before God, I think God is remembering the promise that He made from the very beginning to Adam and Eve. You disobey and you die. You obey and you live. And this is what humanity now is going to experience. They're going to experience the cup of the wine of the fierceness of His wrath. Right? And so when you go into chapter 17. John is given an explanation. I mean, because does this seem a little unnatural for God to take that step to say, okay, I'm gonna give you exactly what you deserve.
I'm going to give them exactly what they want.
Well, nobody's going to want plagues falling. In
Well,
fact,
no.
when you read the last thing about the hailstones there,
But I mean, by the nature
they
of what
blaspheme God because they were exceedingly great.
what I'm saying is because they chose what they wanted more,
They got
they
what they
accepted
wanted.
the terms of this agreement.
Yeah.
And they said, I want the plagues, in essence of the fact that they chose to want this more than him.
It's also, at least from like,
Not directly, obviously.
I was watching stuff last night about the trumpets and plagues, and a lot of people were referring to them as like when they are out for blood, for wanting the blood of the saints, like when they want to kill them and they want to martyr them. God gives them exactly what they wanted, and He gives them blood to drink instead.
Yeah.
So He gives, like, basically this is all the stuff that they want, but it's just happening to them instead because they're trying to do it to God's people.
Right. In other words, they have no problem being corrupt toward others.
Yeah.
And God's saying, if that's the course that you've taken, now you're going to receive. You're going to be on the receiving end.
Yeah.
You've been on the giving end for a long time. Now you're going to be on the receiving
Do
end.
unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Right.
Yes, that's what
I
God
think,
gives
I
them.
think 17 too, that was significant, because it talks about, I'll show you the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters,
Right.
with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. Now, that's an unusual term, because we understand about kings and fornication. I mean, that's in society everywhere you go, people in high offices.
Right.
But it implies an intimate connection with evil, not just people who are casually evil. This is a deliberate choice to link up with wickedness.
In fact, it says here, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters. Right. So, and of course, the many waters is defined in verse 15 of the same chapter there. The waters which you saw were where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So this is a worldwide system, apostate system, if you will. Right? In the book Last Day Events here, she talks about Babylon's fall not yet complete, etc. And she says here, she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. How is this done? Right. So what's the process here? It says by forcing men to accept a spurious Sabbath. So she ties this in specifically to a spurious Sabbath. Now why would that be of great significance? Let me read another one for you while you're thinking about that. She says, not yet, however, can it be said that she shall make all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. She has not yet made all nations do this. Not until this condition shall be reached, and the union of the church with the world shall be fully accomplished through Christendom. With the fall of Babylon, will the fall of Babylon be complete? The change is a progressive one, and the perfect fulfillment of Revelation 14:8 is yet future. Okay? So, it says, when do our sins reach into heaven? It's Revelation 18. When the law of God is finally made void by legislation. So it's not until it's legislated, and then all the world follows after that legislation, that Babylon has made her choice fixed or complete. Because legislation is how a nation speaks. Right now, there are people in our nation, for example, that honor the true Sabbath. They would resist following a spurious Sabbath, right? They would resist that. And because of that resistance, they'll be persecuted, and prosecuted and persecuted, etc. But once it's legislated, you see, that's a game changer. Because what does that say to God?
We know better.
Yeah, we're setting ourselves up above you. We're changing.
Your law
We're
doesn't
thinking to change your law. We think we have enough chutzpah. We're arrogant enough, right? We're proud enough that we're going to change what you specifically wrote as the Creator. We're just.
We were talking this week about the shift that took place in our society and in our world right around the 1962-63 time frame,
Right.
when so many things in society changed in one fell swoop, and that was like the beginning of the removing of prayer from public schools and the fight for atheists to have. I mean, that's like the first shot at doing this, and the government said, okay, you don't want to have any Bible teaching and prayer in schools, then we'll take that out. And look at where our society has degenerated since that time.
Yeah, some people have graphed out all kinds of different things in terms of crime, serious crime that was committed before and after those decisions were made, teen pregnancy, divorce rates, etc. I mean, all this stuff has been tracked and charted, and there's this huge spike after the 1962 and 3 era, where prayer is taken out of schools, and other things. The Supreme Court is making changes. You have Kennedy, a Catholic, becoming president. I mean, it seemed like there was this paradigm shift back there in 62 and 3. And as a result of that, all this nonsense really spiked up. Drug use, abortions, teen sex, drug usage, tobacco usage.
It was also the advent of
this
fast
huge
food
spike.
and McDonald's, which our society began to go downhill dietary-wise.
Yeah.
And when the health declines, the mind declines, and the ability to think and reason.
But there were at least a dozen things that we looked at
In
that
1962 and 3,
had a
that
tremendous spike as a result of that. It took us down. But here is another paradigm shift. At the end, there's a paradigm shift where our country actually legislates against the law of God. Right?
Well, they already
They
have.
legislate against the law of God.
Not
Well,
in
how-
the fullest sense, but they already have in probably a couple of ways. It would not besides the fact that the Sunday law stuff is already on the law, just not being enforced, but
And the papacy is reviving it. I just saw an article this week that I think Italy is gonna be enforcing Sunday closings now.
Right. Yeah,
Or
it's
stores.
true.
There's a few countries that already do it.
Right.
But I'm saying this is, you can see
that are
this is
kinda
being
testing it out.
agitated behind the scenes, where you
And
don't
they're-
hear a whole lot about
And
it.
they're being just primed, right? So that when the U.S. makes it a law, it'll be easy for them to say, oh, we need to make this an international thing.
Because most everyone will already be doing it to some degree.
Everybody will be thinking along the same line. Because, listen, when this kind of thing happens, the devil has a way of making it look like it's a positive step. Oh, this is positive for the family, and the economy. There's this positive atmosphere and attitude, and it seems to be going in the right direction. So expect that that.
There's two different things at work here too, with the kings of the earth committing fornication with her. They are making a decision to be intimately connected with an evil system. This is a knowing thing. This is not something that they're deceived into. But then it says that the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication.
Right.
So that her wine, her pharmakia, if you will,
Right.
deceives the whole world. And when you're drunk, you can't make a good decision.
Right.
You can't discern.
thinking
You
clearly.
lose your discernment. So you have the whole world under the spell, under the influence of this evil spirits.
So John is carried away in the spirit into the wilderness, and he sees a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. Because remember, the seventh angel has basically come and said, I'm going to show you the judgment of the great harlot, etc. Right? And here's the woman arrayed in purple and scarlet and adored with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations of the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. So this clearly is showing that you have now a woman riding this beast system, right? Down in the verses below there, verse 7, the angel said, why do you marvel? I'll tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her. So here you have what's being pictured, this woman. And a woman, what does a woman in Bible prophecy represent?
Church.
Okay, a woman in Bible prophecy is like a church. You go back to chapter 12 of Revelation. Now I saw a sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, etc. Garland of 12 stars. So a woman in Bible prophecy is pictured as a church. Now that would, in chapter 12, that would have been a pure church, right? But here, this is a woman that is following.
She's not wearing white.
She's not wearing white, right? And she's a woman that is involved with the ideology and the thinking of Baal worship and so forth. She's the mother of harlots. Her doctrine, which is her wine, her pharmakia, is causing people to be numbed down and deceived, etc., etc. So this is not a pure woman. This is an apostate woman. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints. Here's a woman that has persecuted God's people and the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. So, John, of course, is living at a time when the Roman Empire is in full swing, but not the papal Roman Church. All right, he's right here. He's at about 100 AD, 100 AD. The papal church doesn't really start its persecution heavily until when? Till the 5th, 6th century, from 538 AD to 1798, which historians call the Dark Ages. And during that time, between 50 and 100 million, this is their own estimate, between 50 and 100 million people were martyred for their faith. So that's the greatest terrorist organization that's ever existed on our planet. The Papal Church during the Dark Ages. All right? And the woman is drunk with the blood of the saints. She's just delirious with trying to force people to accept her dogma and her way of thinking. All right?
And
She's
of course,
drunk with it.
we know that Satan works through two different means. He works through enticement,
serpent,
He will deceive you
as a
as a
serpent.
serpent, and if that doesn't work, then he'll work by
He has,
force.
yeah, he has no choice then but to persecute. Okay? And so there's always been a lot of resistance toward Baal worship and the principles of the mystery religion. Always been a lot of resistance, but millions of people, literally millions, tens, hundreds of millions of people have paid with their lives to resist that. And of course the woman is pictured as being drunk with all that blood. In verse 7 there, the angel said to me, "Why do you marvel?" You know, why would John marvel with great amazement?
I would think just watching this, would be, it says with great admiration, but that doesn't really what the word means. It doesn't necessarily mean admiring, just like he stood there with his mouth open. Like,
Yeah, I think he was in awe at how could society. I mean, here he is now living under the pagan Roman Empire, and he's thinking, how could society buy into this pretentious religious nonsense? How could they even buy into it? So he's probably thinking.
Obviously, John's coming on the heels of all the persecution and martyrdom that was going on in the Roman Empire.
Exactly.
So he has seen
He
this,
can
and
understand that.
he knows that the Christian church is smarter than this and has stood up to it. And yet what he's seeing here is that all the earth is following this. All the earth is
Right.
turning away from
So
God.
that,
and following
I mean,
us.
to live under a pagan secular government and you see persecution, that's somewhat logical. You know that they're heathenistic. You know that they don't claim to be, followers of God. But then what's pictured though is here are the followers of God supposedly, and they're the ones that are the greatest terrorist organization in the world. So he had to be going, what? This doesn't add up.
Susan said, I think he was appalled.
Paul, I think so.
Good choice.
Absolutely. And so the angel says to him, "Why do you marvel? I'll tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns." And I think that the reason why the angel says that is because he wants to emphasize, I believe, to John that this indeed is still the great controversy. What's playing out on our planet is just an extension of what began in heaven, right? And when in heaven, what happened in heaven? Lucifer rebelled, and you had this ultimately, you had this period of time where apparently God let him go around and converse with the other angels, and a lot of other angels sympathized with him and were deceived, and eventually it grew to the place where there was confrontation, and God finally said, "Okay, you've crossed the line, and here's the line. You can't cross it," and they were kicked out of heaven. So you've got a third of the angels that were deceived by this. But this thing is just carried down here to our planet. John is seeing the concluding chapters, the concluding paragraphs of this great controversy that's playing out on our planet. And of course the angel is going to say, you shouldn't marvel at this, because Satan deceived a third of the angels in heaven. He's certainly going to have the capability of deceiving most of humanity. When Jesus was here, he said there were 2 roads you could take, right? You had the broad road and the narrow road. And which road did Jesus want you on?
The narrow.
He said you've got to take the narrow road, the straight, narrow road. And few are going to be on that road as compared to the broad road. And that road leads to destruction. So,
Does it say narrow path more?
pardon me?
Narrow path?
Narrow path?
Yeah.
It's either path or road. I'm not sure what the original word.
I don't know, I feel like path would also
Susan
be
says,
really
just
good.
remember 2/3 were not deceived, did not follow.
Yeah, praise God for that. So, but I mean, we're talking millions and millions of angels potentially, from what I understand. So here you have.
It's interesting that a majority of heaven didn't fall, but a majority of humanity will have. I mean, I say that based on that theory that the saved humanity will make up the difference of fallen angels.
Yeah.
It's just interesting that we have this kind of opposite balance there.
Yeah. Well, I guess it really shows you how naive we are and how dumbed down we are. I mean, humanity is, in heaven, you're in this perfect environment, right? There is no process over time of dumbing down and becoming stupider, as you get older, which seems to be the case. Plus, you have all this outside influence. You've got drugs, alcohol, environment that's working all against you. You didn't have that in heaven. So, I mean, the world has ripened itself for the direction that it's going in. There's no question about that. But the angel comes back and says, the beast that you saw, deals with the beast first, was and is not and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And perdition, what means basically to destruction. Right? So you see this beast system. Now, beast system in the Bible is a political system, a secular government, if you will. And what's pictured in 17 here is the church, a corrupt church, riding or controlling a political system. The Bible says that we're going to go to a one-world system of government. That's how they're going to be able to make this, the Sabbath law, a universal type thing. Right? But here you have the beast system, and it just simply says that it was, and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit, which is being highlighted in chapter 9 of Revelation, after Satan kind of shows up as under the fifth trumpet.
Susan says perhaps a third of humanity will then complete things. It's an interesting point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that's what you were just commenting about.
She was commenting on your comment.
What's weird is I didn't know that a decent amount of people believe that Satan is still in heaven. Yeah. Apparently he's going to come down because he's going to be cast out now to release the plague.
Oh,
like,
some
I was like, that doesn't make
people
sense.
believe that he's in charge of hell too.
Yeah.
Charge of hell, right.
Just another deception that's out there.
All right, so what about this beast that was, is not, sent out of the bottomless pit? So obviously, you have these secular principles, guidelines, secular thinking. It's always existed. I think it's always been there from right out of the Garden of Eden after they sinned. I think you still had those. I think the tentacles go all the way back there. But certainly it gets a kickstart with Nimrod and around the Tower of Babel. So you've got this secular system, but it says, and it is not. So does that seem to indicate that there was a time in history when it was somewhat subdued? A period in time when maybe it was subdued. But then at the end particularly, because we kind of, at least in this country, we kind of pride ourselves on being a progressive society, we're a tolerant people, but we have common sense, and we're growing and learning and expanding, and it's all going to be peachy creamy in the future, even though we go through these cycles of, these down cycles and up cycles, etc. You like that?
If it was peachy keen or something like that.
Peachy cream.
Peachy creamy?
Peachy creamy, I don't think that's a term, but that's okay.
Yeah, I like cool if I'm on peaches, not tonight. Anyway, so you get this picture of this secular beast system being in power, then it's kind of subdued, and at the end particularly, because it ascends out of the bottomless pit. Satan is the one that opens that pit and unleashes that. And then eventually it goes to destruction. Those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. The people of the world will kind of marvel that all of a sudden there's this secular beast system. Or will they marvel because now it's it's a one world system? Is that what they'll marvel at? How could we all, we're like 176 nations, sovereign nations. How could all of a sudden we become one? Is that what they'll marvel over? Perhaps.
We'll all become United Nations.
Because now, it's interesting that it says those who are not written in the book of life, those people that study Scripture already know that a one-world system is coming. That it's been progressing for the last 50 years. The idea has been around for hundreds of years. In fact, it goes all the way back to Babylon, right? The whole idea of the one-world system. But yet, people that are distracted, that aren't studying, all of a sudden will marvel and say, "Wow, man, look where we are now. We're one unified world." Here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits.
7 mountains?
You know, why would they throw that in there?
What are mountains supposed to be?
Yeah, what are mountains supposed to be?
Could they empires or?
Well, it has to do with a seat of power. I mean, a mountain was used as a protection, because if you were up high, you could see anything that was coming to attack you. So the cities were usually put on mountaintops.
Right, so you have the advantage when you're, it's talking about
High ground.
the high ground, about having an advantage. So here the 7 heads are giving you advantage, right? Giving you the advantage. They're also 7
being
kings.
a number of completeness.
And there are also 7 kings. 5 have
Very
fallen, 1 is, the other's not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is also of the 7, and is going to destruction. Right? Seems kind
It's a
of,
very confusing.
it seems kind of like real wordy and kind of weaving back and forth.
Future,
you know?
past, present talk.
Yeah, all this kind of poetic almost. Not. I mean, when people read that kind of stuff, they just kind of head spin around a couple times and they think, "What? What's it talking about?" You know. Again, in order for Satan to perpetuate his own existence, what must he do?
Citadels at the tops of the hills, Susan says.
Convince everybody.
From a mountain.
Have
In order
nobody-
for Satan,
have nobody here left to save.
in order for Satan to perpetuate his own existence, and that's what this whole controversy down here on this planet's been about. Him trying to gain access to the tree of life, originally in the Garden of Eden, but then also gaining control of humanity. If he gains total control of humanity, he can basically tell God, "There's no reason for you to come back here. This place is mine. These are all my subjects. They've bowed to me. They've accepted me as Lord and Savior, not you. No reason for you to come here." And if God forced his way in, what would that say to his creation? What would that say to the remainder of his creation?
Well, that's the whole issue from the beginning. Was Satan was saying it was all by force.
By force.
And God, God was unfair and unjust. So if God goes in and wipes them out,
All right.
their doubts that they're put in there are going to be justified.
All right. So what John is basically saying here is that you've got an entire planet that is going. God is going to allow the entire planet, right, to become unified to the point where they will reject the truth of Scripture, and they will persecute. They will try to eliminate. Satan will impress them that need to eliminate the people of God. Anybody who resists this move to this one world system needs to be eliminated. Okay? And
I like verse 9 though. He says, "Here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth." This is identifying geographically to some extent. And in his day, Rome was the center of the world.
right,
Rome has always been known as the seven-hilled city, built
sure.
on 7 mountains.
right.
So without actually naming the Roman system, he's
And-
identifying
And
it.
these could be the 7 mountains, the 7 places of advantage over humanity. Okay? If you have control of these things, if you have if you have a religious head, and a political head, an economic head, an agricultural head, a military head, an education head, an energy head, if you have control over those entities, then you have control of humanity. And if somebody doesn't want to play ball, if somebody doesn't want to come in line, you can
cut
just
them off from
you
whatever
cut them
system
off.
you've got there.
You cut them off from all of this. They have no energy, they have no food, they have no protection, they have no means to buy or sell, they have nothing in which to function in society.
I would say instead of education, I would say medical. Health, medical.
Yeah, I think we did put medical under there. Healthcare,
I
basically.
mean, yeah, I know the devil's been in charge of education for a long time, so
Right.
it's not too terribly surprised.
So-
But I think people would be surprised to realize that healthcare was under his control.
Sim and I looked at of course we got to probably bring this to an end here, but Sim and I watched a video just yesterday evening about some people think that Babylon, this great Babylon, is a country,
Ingrid says the
Right.
7 mountains are also continents, 7 continents.
7 continents.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
So again, we're talking global
Yeah.
here. The
It is global.
angel is trying to give John the impression This is a global
I
move.
thought that's what we were implying.
God is going to allow a global move against
you thinking
his
of that.
people, okay? Against the people of God. In other words, God is allowing the situation to become an impossibility, just like with the story of Gideon. You remember the story of Gideon, right? And we can end with this. The story of Gideon is an example of what will take place at the end on a global scale. God whittles the number down. God whittles the number down to those who he can trust, that he knows will be faithful no matter what.
Ingrid
Okay.
says, that being said, he is saying the false church is everywhere.
Absolutely. The false church is everywhere, right? And people will be unified under two things: spiritualism and the false Sabbath. So you've got the false Sabbath and spiritualism that will unite the entire world against God's people at the end. And all of that is in the works right now. You see, everything that John is being told here has been in the works for a number of years. And so, really where that leaves us is, and this is the reason why God is putting this stuff in here, we need to understand that this is right before us. And we need to make preparation to do without, to live without. Okay? Sim and I were talking last night about if they turned the power off, if something happened and the power went out, you've got to be able to function and to live. It's going to be very uncomfortable. A lot of people will not survive. You turn the power out, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people will die in the first couple of weeks if you turn the power off. Really. People are so...
You've also got to consider there's a certain amount of people that are dependent on machines
Absolutely.
to produce oxygen.
Absolutely. So,
Different electrical things that go on. They have, with the power companies already have a priority list when they're restoring power. They restore power first to the people who have emergency medical
People in a
needs.
city have to rely on power to get water out of their faucet.
anyway, we'll pick this back up
Everybody.
and do 17 and 18.
Okay.
17 and 18, we'll finish those up next week. But again, we're talking about a worldwide move to eliminate the people of God.
I mean, I used to believe that we were talking about a religious system that would hoodwink the kings of the earth, like Rome did in the Dark Ages, to control all the kings by threats of whatever. But now I see where the world is going. It's like when the Bible talks about the pharmakia. We have a world that's drugged up,
Drugged up. Oh,
that
totally.
are already
Totally.
that already don't know how to think for themselves. They don't know how to reason from cause to effect. They don't know how to solve a problem. They simply know how to emotionally react. And when the emotions get out of control, you take a pill.
Not
The
only
average-
that, they also think that
the
they're very
average-
intelligent, that they're thinking reasonably.
The average 60-year-old person in this country is on 12 medications. The average 60-year-old
It's a good symbolic
is
number.
on 12 medications.
Well,
It's probably up to 13 by now, so maybe.
Angel told me recently that she went for a doctor visit. I guess she was going to go just for a checkup. She had never had one in a long time.
Right.
And the doctor asked what medications she was on. And she
Right.
said none. And he said,
No way.
no way.
No way.
He said, everybody over 30 is on some type of medication.
Oh, yeah.
And to think that he had this mindset that so many people should be on medication, that this was acceptable and a good
Probably
thing.
had never run into anybody that wasn't.
That's what he said. He just he didn't know quite how to process this, that she
You
wasn't
want to
on
go ahead and
something.
close this out?
Father, thank you so much for the Sabbath and for this time to come together as a family and study your word and to look into Revelation. We ask that as we continue our studies in the coming Sabbaths and throughout the week, that you would guide us in our understanding and help us to be clear-minded. Lord, help us to be healthy and fit and ready for your return, and help us to do everything we can to tell others of your soon coming. This is my prayer in the name of your Son. Amen.
We had some good discussion points today. Susan said, blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written,
Yeah.
for the time is at hand.
Yeah, within the end. And that's that time right there. Probation for-
I just said, shucks, I'm on 22.
Oh, yeah. 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 It's amazing.
Hard to believe, isn't it? I know, but Mom's medication list was about 20 different medications.
Elza was just saying that one of the people she cleans for said that she takes too many medications but then she has to take other medications
To
to
counter-
help
Counteract the medication.
the side effects of the other medication.
Yep.
Yeah.
Does anybody see anything wrong with that concept?
Playing chemistry with your own body doesn't
Oh,
sound
we-
like a good idea.
Yeah. Well, that only tells you that the medications that you're taking initially
I
aren't
haven't
doing,
stopped recording.
aren't doing the proper thing for you if you've got to take things, if they cause side effects,
Yeah.
then you shouldn't be taking them to start with.
Yeah, I mean, there's
They don't cause side effects, they cause effects.
In fact,